I have taken this FAO information, which isn't as up-to-date as Brian Clancy's, but I wanted to use the most consistent data to compare and look at sort of this history of production and exports from Turkey. And then I'm going to ask the panelists just to comment a little bit about what's been driving the pulse industry in each of these countries, what they see as some of the opportunities for continued production and growth of the export industry for pulses in their country. So if we go back to 2000, take a look. The blue line is production of pulses. Getting a little bit of feedback, so maybe we'll get that off the point being is, I guess one of the comments that's obvious from the slide is that Turkey is actually a major consumer, a major producer, but is also consuming a large percent of pulses. We look over the same time period for Australia. You see a little more variability in production and exports, and Gavin, maybe we'll get a comment from you about that. Taking a look at Canada's production and exports over the same period, you see again some level of volatility in what's there in production, but a slow but fairly steady rate of growth. And then we take finally a look at the US numbers, and Tim, be interested to hear your views on this and the role of government policy and other things that are driving that increase, what's a fairly constant increase over the last number of years, and certainly you can update it with some more recent numbers. And just before I open it up to discussion, I wanted to put in this slide that Tim gave me this morning, because it also fits a little bit with some of the things that Brian Clancy was talking about, and that is the competition for acres that all of these producing nations have, where farmers have a choice of growing pulses. Sometimes it's peas and lentils in the same growing area, but those farmers can also look at wheat or canola, and again, in bean areas it might be soy or it might be corn. So the crops can be different, but the competition for acres at the production level is still there. So Tim, I want to start the discussion with you and just ask you, what have you seen in the US in the last 10 years that's driven your industry forward? And what kind of signal do you think that is sending us that we can extrapolate going forward with?
Well, I think let's see if this is on here. I think what's happening in the US is that we've had a lot of summer fallow acres across the northern tier of the United States that are now starting to be populated with pulse crops. And we did have, in the United States, farmers are the same all around the world. It's about how much money they can make on each acre that they produce. And so one of our impediments in the United States was our government programs favored some crops over others. And we corrected that inequity in 2002. And so farmers had some safety net that they could rely on, which that safety net, by the way, has been diminished because of the budget problems in the United States. But the pulse acreage in the United States, I actually expect to continue to increase in the next 5 to 10 years, perhaps even double, at least for peas, lentils, and chickpeas. I think that dry bean acreage will probably increase as well in the next 5 to 10 years, although at probably a slower rate, because they face a bit more competition from corn and soybeans in the dry bean growing regions in the United States. The chart that Gordon put up is the reality that we face in the United States and North America, for that matter, that we have corn and soybeans moving further and further into our traditional pulse growing region. When you think of the United States and Canada, for that matter, and where these crops are grown, the climate's pretty cold. In fact, it's usually darn cold. But now we're seeing shorter season corn and shorter season soybeans, and now we have soybeans that are being grown in the United States right along the Canadian border, and it's pretty shocking and with some pretty good yields. So the chart that was shown a little bit earlier, as a farmer myself, we're seeing increased competition from corn and soybean acreage, which we have to keep ahead of as an industry in our own research programs.
Hussein, your country, really the cradle of a lot of pulse production, very long history, major role for many years as an exporter. What would you characterize as some of the biggest changes over the last 10 years, and what does that telling you or telling the rest of us about where Turkey is going to go as both a producing and an exporting nation?
Coincidentally, I put this article a few months ago on this because CICIL requested an article. I put this subject in my article, and coincidentally, I realized yesterday that my today's subject is the same subject. So it was for me good things that to see also here. I am taking also advertisement on page 42 by Ganesh Agro Food. Who is here? I don't know him. Where is he here? Ganesh Agro Food. No. Anyway, thanks very much. So in last 10 years, what happened? Actually, you should see the changes not only in demand and consumption. There are other things affecting the country's importance. Like in end of the 80s, Turkey was almost the only source of green lentil. And at that time, we had a very big production. And people's age allowing may remember, Turkish government sent split green lentils in 1987 in free of charge to Indian government in some regions. That is how green lentil splitting story started. After that, Canada started to take picture in green lentil. The reason of this is that we had always weevil damage kernels. So we could not guarantee 0% on the weevil damage, so we had weevils. So imagine family woman in the kitchen opens the Turkish green lentil and having the weevil inside, and it is okay, it is a very, very small amount, negligible, but it is there. So this affected the Turkish lentil marketing, and this increased the production in Canada. So although we had proper places to do the same thing as Canadian did, but because of the nature of the governments at 1980s, this couldn't be handled properly. So we lose the market not only for the consumption, production, technical side, because we had problem in production of the quality, and the Canadians were successful on this. And after having this green lentil success in Canada, Canadians started to walk on red path. But if you look at the average of the last 10 years, if you, we had some problems on the climate, drought, and sometimes we had excess of rain. This caused some disease on the lentils. The shift is started. The consumption is there. We don't consume less. Consumption is even with increasing with population, maybe a little bit more. Production, because of the weather condition, is changing. But what we are seeing is that the world production is moving from the traditional places, like it was likely to see India, Turkey is net exporter sometimes, but now you see the exporter is changed to be Canada, USA, and Australia. So that is briefly what's happening in the next 10 years. I don't want to take the time of the other friends. And if you give me a word afterwards, I can give more details.
Okay, we'll do that. Gavin, one of the themes that Hussein spoke about was some variability with weather that perhaps is a lead into some of the variability we've seen in Australia's production and exports over the last 10 years.
The chart that you showed is the FAO figures, I think, yes. And it shows a huge amount of variability within Australia. But in actual fact, that chart would show even more variability if lupins were included, because lupins are one of the big pulse crops in Australia. And we've seen variation in lupin production largely driven by the availability of price to growers. but also to a certain extent by changes in the weather, which something between 300,000 tonnes to 1 million tonnes of lupins have grown at various times during the year. The big drop in 2002, or in that area, is probably a hangover from the situation that occurred when ascochyta, which is a major disease of some pulse crops, emerged in Australia. Growers went through a bad period where they lost money, and inevitably what happens in Australia is that growers will, if they're short of dough, plant wheat on wheat. And I think there's a fundamental thing that it's worth understanding about Australia as it applies to pulse crops, and that is we have a population of about a little bit less than 25 million people, about the same as the annual increase of population in India. And culturally, we're not a big group of pulse consumers, although that is changing, and the habits are growing much more in our favour. But the reason we grow pulse crops in Australia is purely and simply because of their benefit to the rotation. And at the same time, we have this incredible weather variability. And you remember last year, those of you who saw my small presentation last year, you know, we can go from fire, raging bushfires cutting across the whole of a farm, to flood wiping out the crop, to drought wiping out the crop, to disease of one sort or another. Locusts can come and wipe out the crop. And so it's very, very difficult to get a handle about what is happening with Australian production, except to say that growers want to grow pulse crops, or certainly broadleaf crops, as part of their rotation. And the experiments that we've done in the past have shown that a wheat crop following a chickpea or pea crop can increase yield by up to 30%, which is a huge bonus to the grower. So regardless of what happens in terms of marketing, you will always see pulses grown in Australia for that very reason. And in fact, 20 or 30 years ago, pulses were grown and ploughed in just for the benefit that they provided. There was another issue. Brian talked this morning about showed us a chart showing some yield increases. And I sort of take issue with that a bit, although I do have to say, Brian, if you're still here, that I think you're pretty much spot on with your lentil configuration. It seems to me that what we could maybe look at in a better way is the yield potential based around a set of various climatic scenarios, because the major single thing that I believe the pulse industry has done in Australia, getting back to the beginning of your question, was putting in place in 2004-2005 a national single pulse plant breeding program, with the aim in mind of, on the one hand, providing varieties that would handle drought, handle too much water, handle the diseases better than they were, and at the same time be produced at the quality that the markets that we are forced, because we don't have very much domestic consumption, certainly of the human consumption pulses, the markets that we're forced to send them to, which are largely the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East. So, having said that, if you're interested, I would suggest to you that for this year we are actually in a situation where, if everything remains the same, we will have a very, very big pulse production year. And last night, talking around with some of the people who are sitting out here, we were discussing this. The real problem you've got, Gordon, in getting some sort of response from me on that is that nobody really knows. And there are two people sitting out there who'll swear to you that we're going to get over 1 million tonnes of Desi chickpeas out this year, and there are another couple who say if it doesn't rain again between now and the end of May, and if it changes by the end of August and we get too much rain, we'll be lucky to get 300,000 tonnes.
Well, we've got a couple of panels coming up that are going to get into more details about lentils and chickpeas, so we'll probably save some of that discussion for then.
Sure.
Just a really quick comment on Canada and some of the production. You're going to hear a very similar story from the production region in the US or Australia. These are farmers who are relative newcomers to putting pulses into their rotations. over the last 30 years, this has been the shift that's occurred. The technology has changed in all of our countries so that the seeding equipment is better, the harvest equipment is better, and all of these countries, and Hussein, you spoke last year about some of the government programs to encourage farmers to use new seed. There are programs in place in all of the countries to encourage farmers to become better and more reliable producers. We can't control the weather, but if we can be starting to address some of the issues of leaf diseases or fertility, at least we can try to cut down on some of that variability. So I think the future is going to be a little more of what we've seen in the past, and that is we still have investment programs at the grower level and at the government level to encourage better varieties, continued improvement. So it's perhaps one of the hallmarks of all of these 4 countries is that there is still a focus on being a major producer and an exporter by having certain programs. Any comments about the investments that will guide the future of production? Tim?
No doubt we're going to see some increased research efforts in new production zones in the United States. I was recently in the mountain states in Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas, which are not traditionally producers of peas and lentils. And we're going to have perhaps 20 to 30,000 acres as a beginning in these areas, and it's all going to go into dryland agriculture. This isn't an irrigated cropland. The technologies have changed for farmers to use in direct seeding operations where they can conserve moisture in these low rainfall areas. They're discovering that these crops are low water use crops, and they are fantastic, as Gordon and Gavin pointed out, being fantastic rotational crops. And I think in that zone, in that central mountain state zone, we're going to see a tremendous increase in production of these crops in a cereal grain rotation. So we're going to see our traditional areas in North Dakota and Montana, Idaho, and Washington, but we're going to see some new production areas come online here in the next 5 years that will continue to increase production in the United States, as well as the research efforts in trying to increase yields and handle disease problems.
I mean, once farmers, they used to, when they start using the pulse, because this is a rotation crop, everybody on this room, I believe, knows that it is favorable for farmer, favorable for everything. But this is, the government supports in Turkey, if you speak namely. Before, as you underline, there wasn't any support. So the farmer, they were using the seed that previously they used, same seed. They were not using certified seed. Now the government is supporting this idea. And not only the supporting the certified seed usage, but also they have using the fuel support and also soil analysis, if you make, they are supporting. So if you add up all these things, farmers is getting like $100 per ton of support from the government for the pulses. So this is, I mean, the money is important for the farmer, but for us it is important that they started to have a knowledge that they have to use proper chemical, because some of them they weren't using any, some of them they were using excess, so which means spending more. So this knowledge and information is now with the farmers, it is developing. And the certified seed usage is increasing the production, of course, because what they were doing, they were exchanging the seed with neighbor or with next town, so to get the better yield. But now this is started to change, also with Exporters Union work also on this, and also Pulse Council, that which is set up in Turkey, is also managing this very well. But the driving force will be the consumption. I mean, we always thought of using the consumption. The Indians will use it, Turks will use it, so they consume it. I mean, when I say use it, we'll consume it. But we should find a non-traditional consuming way of pulses to use it as a driving force. Let's say Canada in excess of lentils this year, So what will happen? There is a excess. So there is a with regular pattern of consumption. What you should do, you should have a drought in one of the corner to eliminate this extra stocks. But we have to find also industry should look for non-traditional consumption ways. Like I can ask here, you know that they are exporting pea to China. When you started to export the pea to China?
10 years ago.
10 years ago. So why China started to import the pea, Sudhakar? Why China, don't sleep, why China is importing pea but not 10 years before? Anyway, he doesn't know the reply. Huh? This is, okay, this is quiz question. Okay, I give you the reply. Because Sudhakar has an agreement with me. In my speech, he has at least 2 questions in the quiz asking in my speeches. So one of the questions is, who was the best panelist? The reply is simple. If you don't say Hussein, because it goes with the majority, I am always the winner. If you want to be winner, you should put. Otherwise, you will lose $5,000.
Canada and Australia are very similar in this regard. I mean, the system in Australia is slightly different in that the growers pay a levy to an organisation called the Grains Research and Development Corporation, and that levies virtually 1% of the selling price of their grain. The government matches that with a small subsidy. It's a little bit less than 30%. And then that money is taken by the Grains Research and Development Corporation, and they intend to spend it roughly in accordance with the value of the crops that are out there. But in actual fact, we've been very lucky in the last 8 or 10 years in that we've managed to get more than our share into research of all kinds into pulse production. Now, exactly what Tim said is happening in Australia. We're looking at salt tolerance, we're looking at drought tolerance, we're looking at low water usage. We're endeavouring to move crops that are designed for that particular agronomic set of circumstances into the drier zones and even into the wetter zones. And the fact of the matter is that, for example, with Desi chickpeas, we have varieties now that compared with yields, if you were lucky, of 1.25 or 1.5 tonnes to the hectare, in the same ground, in the same circumstances, are now yielding up to 3 tonnes a hectare. So there have been amazing advances in the plant breeding, and that's specifically the first major thing that's happened with us. The second one is, and Hussein talked about this, and I've actually been to Mersin and I've met some of his people there and talked to them about what they're doing in the field. And we've taken a leaf out of that book in a sense, because we have a team through Pulse Australia of agronomists in the field who are developing management programs, who are providing training courses for agronomists and farmers in how to grow these crops successfully and meet the market quality requirements. And I think that those 2 things combined are leading us into a situation where we will have less variability in our production despite the weather.
Okay, so common theme you're hearing, I guess, that reinvestment in pulses.
Yep.
Pulses are still seen as an opportunity crop because of the market demand and the fact they fit well in a rotation. So I think it's a sign of a healthy industry where people are still investing and still looking forward for growth. I want to keep us on time, and so I want to change speed or change direction a little bit. This was just a slide I hadn't shown previously, but it does sort of show the importance that we've had in Canada, Turkey, the US, and Australia in terms of this slide is showing exports from the 4 countries, which I've called the Big 4, as part of world trade in pulses. So we are playing a significant role. But let's talk about where the world is going, and let's start looking at some of the forces that are shaping what's going on in agriculture, because it's not just 4 countries that are playing a big role. This is some information about money coming into agriculture and coming into some of the regions of the world where there is tremendous production potential that maybe isn't fully realized. So I just want to put up a few slides, and then I want to get some response from the panelists here. This is just some information. about both sovereign investments as well as financial fund money that's coming into agriculture in different regions of the world. And I'm going to ask for the rest of you to give me some perspective or your thoughts on what this might mean. Pension funds. Agriculture has become a very interesting area of investment.
For this fact, I mean, our world population is growing by 3 billion people, they estimate, by the year 2050. And frankly, if we don't have some more production areas and increase our yields of these pulse crops, we are not going to be able to feed these people. And so I don't see them so much as competitors as an opportunity actually to feed the world population with still an inexpensive vegetable protein. I believe that pulse production, if we're competitive price-wise and with other crops, will continue to increase in the United States. You know, I see this as a very interesting development that people are starting to invest in agriculture. Pension funds go where the money is too, just like farmers do, and right now that's in agriculture, and I think that's a good thing for our overall infrastructure.
Saying you as a company might be making investments as well as following where some of this other money is going. I'd be interested in your perspective about the potential of some of these new regions to become either niche or perhaps major suppliers of pulses for your business and for the rest of the pulse trade. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the sovereign funds and buying the agricultural land, this is not a threat, this is an opportunity. I agree with Tim. I mean, if you look at the pulse is not something that farmers grows because only it's high price. Because they have to, for rotational purpose, they have to do it, otherwise next crop will be in trouble or it will have to spend more on fertilizer or etc. to have the better yield on the next coming crop. So the problem here is with the companies, what kind of pulses you will pursue farmers to grow. It's not that pulses will grow or not. Pulses will grow. For our industry, I am never worried. So here is the question, what kind of pulses the farmer will grow? This kind of people, when they come, when they buy the land, it's not then for occupational purpose, it is for the profit-based company. So when they come for the profit, they will try develop and maybe they will help us to develop more seed and they are going to use more techniques in this region. I may not say this in USA or Canada, but let's say in Ukraine, Turkey, Syria, in these places, if they are buying these lands, and this is going to help using better techniques and better seeds for the land, and maybe they are going to even have some extra funds to spare for the research. So this is not a threat, this is an opportunity.
I'd like to start by quoting Pravin Dongre from a conversation we had last night, who was actually channeling Chandrasekhar from the Goa Convention, and just quote a couple of facts. It's considered reasonably true that 50% of the Indian population is eating less than half what is normally considered to be a requirement for proper human development. That's not me saying it, that's coming from the Indian government department themselves. The GDP growth in India in the last 8-10 years has been incredible, and at the top of the pile, right at the top in India, so much money has been made that it's just dripping around. And talking to Pravin last night, he said, well, yes, we're starting to see that fall through, and he actually thinks that there is a potential for Indian consumption to rise from something around 18 or 20 million tonnes of pulses a year in the next 5 to 10 years to 30 or even 35 million tonnes just because of that one social change. And at the same time, because of, and assuming things remain the same, because of government regulation and other things, it's likely that domestic pulse production in India, if anything, will drop rather than increase. So, having said that, think of the incredible opportunity that's there. And that's only one of the opportunities, because as you know, and Tim and your involvement in the Pulses for Health and Nutrition program, we're suddenly starting to see a burgeoning new market in value-added pulses, which are either because it's fractions of the pulses being used as additives in other foods. But imagine this, if it suddenly became possible, and if McDonald's came under sufficient pressure from the anti-obesity people in the world, and it could be shown that by putting just a couple of grams of a pulse flour in every McDonald's bun, that they could contribute towards fixing that problem, the world's your oyster. We wouldn't be able to provide enough product for it.
And Gavin, and to that point, this slide, which Tim provided me on world population growth, talks about not only growth in the developed world, but also in the developing world. And so it speaks to this investment is in fact maybe something that's absolutely essential for all of us, because we have to keep pace with this population growth.
Oh, absolutely. And Gordon, look, the industry is globalising. There is no doubt about that. I mean, half the trade out of Australia is, at least, I should be able to quote an exact figure, but is done by multinational companies or companies of that sort, including some that he's associated with. And we welcome that, because all this is doing, as Hossein said so rightly, is upping the ante in terms of development of better ways of doing things.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, and I do want to open the floor to some questions. So I just want to end on this element of nutrition and developing new market opportunities. And you, I know, will be reading your convention magazine, and there's a lot of information in here that we'll just show a couple of slides quickly, but I'd encourage you to have a look in the book. This is a story that I think is a really interesting one, and that is this role of the complementary nature between pulses and cereal crops. You know, there's a line that man cannot live by bread alone. Well, and maybe unless that bread had a few lentil flour, a bit of lentil flour or pea flour or bean flour in it. What this protein score is showing you, and it uses milk protein as a score of 1, and it's comparing various other types of protein to milk, which is given a score of 1 because it provides balanced nutrition for children. This is how other crops compare. We used to talk a lot about protein quantity, but now the food industry is talking a lot more about the quality of the protein. And in jurisdictions where you are regulated by what you can put on a package, in order to be indicating that you are a good source of protein, you have to have a combination of the amount that people would normally eat combined with the protein quality score to see if that you could make the claim. And I'll give you a really simple example of pasta made with durum wheat. Alone, with 12.5% protein, you could not claim that pasta was a good source of protein. Interestingly, even if you made it with 100% lentil flour at 25% protein, you couldn't claim it was a good source of protein. It's only when you combine the cereal and the pulse that you now have an amino acid profile that allows you to make that claim. So I think that where pulses can fit is not only where we are, but into a lot of food products where we have an opportunity to improve the nutritional quality. This OECD study, the richer countries tend to be the most obese countries. It just came out recently, and I'll just flip through this quickly again because we're running out of time. But you look at this chart and you sort of see where obesity rates are. And Tim, I want to just point out that some of you've got your work cut out for you in the United States. But Canada's not far behind, so I'm not being too smart with anybody. We have rising rates of obesity problems. The good news is that we've actually seen a slight decrease in what was expected to be the rise in obesity rate, so people are starting to understand it a little bit more. But this is a chart that hopefully you can see the small print. This is the chart you hope your country's at the top of, because those of us down at the bottom are showing where we're really having these high rates of obesity. And I have to say that, well, where's Australia? I think Australia, Canada, and the US are down at the bottom, so clearly our national associations have a little bit of work to do.
We're in a league of our own.
We're in a league of our own. But I want to end this, and maybe we can have the lights on in the audience so that we can open up for discussions there as well. But just some last comments from the panelists. on where you see as the potential to go with pulses addressing not only the undernourishment issue, but also this issue of overnourishment. Tim, any thoughts? I know that you guys are doing a lot of work in the US, so I know you have some ideas.
I heard a presentation recently about the Green Revolution, and they talked about the Green Revolution absolutely changing the face of agriculture. Yields increased in cereal grains exponentially, and we're still seeing that increase in yields for corn and wheat and other crops in the cereal realm. And so that was a huge advancement in agriculture, was the Green Revolution. But the problem is, as Gordon has pointed out, you cannot eat bread alone. And pulse crops are the answer, and if we have to have our own pulse revolution, and our research in all of our countries has to increase so we can compete with these cereal grains, so we can address these issues that Gordon just put up on the screen. If we're going to feed this population, it is not going to be with meat, it is going to be with vegetable proteins. Inexpensive vegetable proteins to feed this increasing population. And so as a world body, which is why we're together here at CICILS, and the United States is starting to make investments in health and nutrition science to address these issues, not only agronomically, but sustainability-wise for our crops and nutrition-wise, this is something that we don't even have an option. We have to do if we're going to feed these people in the future.